Welcome, welcome, and Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We'll go straight into the share. Find it. So, moving along with Emor, and these rules for the priests, and the rules as related to the Israelites as well. So here we go. So we have these classes, and how these classes interact is an important issue here. And of course, there are other issues that perhaps are worth thinking about. Although I have to say that requires quite a bit of further meditation. So here we go. We were talking about Trumah. We're talking about uh, who is permitted to eat Trumah. We'd explained what Trumah is. Trumah is food, just to review it quickly. It's taken from produce. It's the very first little part of produce that the farmer separates to give to the priests. Essentially, it's 1/50th, in other words, 2%. That's the average amount that the farmer can give. He can give a little more, a little less if he wants. Yes, Judith.
Um, in Parsha Trumah,
Yes.
it seemed like that word Trumah was used differently.
Okay, good question. Thank you. So it comes from the word laharim, which means to lift, right? When you lift something off of something else. That's lifting if you think about it. When you lift, it requires two different objects or places. So it meant a gift, a free will offering in the context of Parshat Trumah, where the context was simply a free will gift to construct the tabernacle. And here it is also something that is separated, that is lifted off from the rest of the farmer's produce. So it has the connotation of separating. Literally, laharim means to lift. So that's why they're connected in that sense, just linguistically and conceptually. Even though the purpose of when they talk about Trumah, simply as Trumah, they're talking about this particular gift that's given to the priests. It's a particular perk that's given to the priests, but the priest has to treat it in a very special kind of way. As I said, it has a low level of sanctity. There are different levels of sanctity, and we're getting the rules regarding this now. So in some cases, we're getting a little bit closer to practicalities as the Torah starts to deconstruct some of the issues going on. So,
Thank you.
all right, great question, Judith. Thank you for asking it. So, Uvat Kohen, and the daughter of a priest, who is normally, as long as she's living at home, she's allowed to enjoy this truma. She's entitled to it too. She has to observe the rules. She has to be in a state of purity in order to be able to partake of it because it's sanctified food, right? But here she goes, Uvat Kohen, ki tiyeh, if should she be to the ish zar, to a zar, meaning a non-Cohen. Rashi will tell us right there. He defines it, leish zar, meaning levi v'Yisrael, to a Levite or an Israelite. So she's not restricted to marry other Kohanim. She is able to marry a non-Kohen, a non-priest. He be trumat hakodashim lo tochel. She should not continue to eat. She is not going to be allowed to eat the Trumat HaKodashim. She is not going to be able to eat this sanctified food. Okay, so that's there. So we're talking about that circumstance. Yes, Judith.
Again, at the beginning of the Parsha, where it says the priest steps back for the death of
Yes,
parents,
yes, yes,
siblings,
yes.
sons,
Right.
and daughters who haven't married.
Correct.
Uh, and in some sense, it's, here while she's living at home. What if after being widowed or even perhaps being divorced, she comes back into her father's household?
I'm so glad you asked that. The Torah is actually going to answer that question. It is going to actually mention it. So hopefully we'll get to it. Okay, we'll see. All right. It's in fact the very next verse, Judith, which, by the way, is a very good sign that you're paying good attention and you're catching on. Look at the next verse. Uvat Kohen, and the daughter of a priest, ki tieh almana, should she be a widow, ugrusha, or divorced? Right? So clearly Judaism accepts divorce, the concept of divorce, right? Okay. But anyway, just in passing. Vezera einla, but she has no offspring, right? So she is left by herself, widowed or divorced, without any children. Veshava el, and she returns el beit aviha. She returns to her father's house, kin ureha, as in her maidenhood, as when she was a young woman. Milechem aviha tochel. She can eat, she can partake of the bread, the food of her father. V'cholza lo yochal bo. However, any non-Cohen shall not eat of it, which we're going to have to understand that because right now we know that already. This is not telling us something we don't know. So that's going to raise a question as to, so what is this verse coming to tell us? Why is it there if we already know that information? But so you now have a partial answer to your question, Judith. Right there. So interesting, right? That you're thinking along the same lines as the Torah, right? Amana ugrusha, a widow or a divorcee, min ha'ish hazar. So it's clarifying, Rashi's clarifying, we're talking about if she's widowed or divorced from that non-Kohen, from that non-Kohen. Going on. Bezera ein la okay, mimenu, and she has no offspring, mimenu, from him, from him. So I wonder if this is talking about where she married before to a Kohen and have children from that Kohen. It's not telling us too much here, but the point is that he has not provided her with any children. Veshava, she should return. So here's the point. Ha'im yesh la zera. So we can infer from that is that if she does in fact have offspring mimenu, from him, asura betruma, there's more to be said. She is forbidden to partake of truma, kol zman, as long as shazera kayam, that offspring is living, which is a subtlety of the language here, because we might have thought that that was simply a permanent state, and we're being told, no, if the children, God forbid, die, and she's left without children, she can return and go ahead to eat Trumah once again in her father's house. And here we are, the last little part, V'chol zar lo yochal bo, but any non-Kohen shall not eat of it. Right? So I said this seems unnecessary. Lo ba ela lahotzi et haonen. The reason for this verse is to tell us that someone who is an onen, and I'll explain that in a moment, is not included in this law of who is not allowed to eat truma. In other words, if a priest becomes an onen, right? This is sort of parallel to the daughter of a priest marrying a non-Kohen, right? So an onen is someone who has lost an immediate relative, and it's prior to burial that we're talking about this. So the first few days of loss, a person is considered to be in a state what is called aninut, aninut. And these days, what that means is prior to burial. And essentially, that involves that one is absolved of positive commandments, All right, that like going to shul, making the minyan, making kiddush, etc. We do not when you're in a state of aninut, you are not obligated to do that. You are absolved of those. You are still you still must obey negative commandments, right? But essentially, positive commandments become excused for that period of time. However, here we go. Shemutar betruma. An onain is one who is permitted to eat truma. And he's going to tell you, Rashi's going to explain the logic of this. Zarut, being a non-Cohen, right? Amarti lach. I said to you. It's as if the Torah is saying, I'm emphasizing that these laws apply to a non-Kohen velo aninut. They do not apply to someone who's in a state of aninut. Now, there's a reason why we might have thought that, because there are certain things that become absolved when one is in a state of aninut related to sacred service. And that's why we might have thought it included partaking of Trumah. And now we're being told that this verse comes to tell us, to emphasize that we're talking about it applying only to non-Kohanim. And one who's in this particular state is not, it doesn't mean that they can't eat Trumah. There might be other reasons they can't eat Trumah. So, for example, if they're in contact with a body, then they become tameh, they become impure, and they cannot eat of Trumah. But simply hearing the news is not enough to do that. Okay. This seems like we're sort of slowly getting into the more we start to define cases of situation that are situational and circumstantial, the closer the Torah is getting to oral Torah, because that's essentially what oral Torah deals with, are the application of these laws, which always involve circumstances and situations, right? So now we get a new situation. The ish and a man, an individual, ki yochal kodesh pishgaga, who eats of the sacred food unintentionally. He didn't realize it was a sacred food, something like that, right? He didn't mean to do it, but he did it. So he is going to have to pay a penalty. Remember, ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but of course, it's very different from sinning intentionally, from intentionally breaking the law. That's a whole different category. But here, you didn't mean to do it, but you did it. The yasaf, so in this case, the yasaf chamishito, he should add a fifth, 1/5, alav on it, V'natan lakohen et hakodesh, and he should then give to the priest the sanctified food. Now, he's consumed it. So Rashi's going to have to explain, what is this verse actually coming to tell us? And we discover that there's a lot more buried into this verse than we might have thought. But that shouldn't come as a big surprise. Here we go with the Rashi. Ki yochal kodesh. So when it says sanctified food, we're talking about Trumah. Specifically, we're not talking necessarily about other sacrifices here, because we know that, like for shlamim, an individual can eat shlamim, right? But a non-Kohen cannot, under any circumstances, eat truma, right? So that we know. But so that's what that's what we're talking about right now. So we're talking about an individual, a non-Kohen, who eats truma. By the way, can a non-Israelite, can a non-Kohen woman, an Israelite woman who marries a Kohen, eat truma? We've actually already dealt with that. And the answer is yes. Yes. That was in fact the very last comment we mentioned in last time we met. So, all right. So here we're talking about an Israelite, basically an Israelite man, could be a woman if she's not married to a priest, who's eaten truma, didn't realize it was truma, and they ate the truma. They consumed the truma. V'natan loken et hakodesh, and he shall give the holy item to the priest. So again, in the Torah Kohanim, in the Sifra, they explain, Dvar hara'ui liyot kodesh. He's saying it has to be something that might well be sanctified. In other words, he has to replace it with some item that could have become truma as well. In other words, if it was grain, he should replace it either with grain or with any other kind of food stuff. Essentially, we're talking about a consumable, right? She'eno pore, because here we're going to say, she'eno porea lo ma'ot, because you cannot redeem it with money. This truma is the point of this verse is that he doesn't give the priest the value of the truma. He has to replace it with food itself, adding 1/5 of the amount. Now, when we say 1/5, we're actually talking about, we always mean 1/4. In other words, it's 1/4 of the original amount, so that if you add that to the original amount, it then becomes 1/5. That amount becomes 1/5. Maybe I can do the math with you right now. Okay, so let's suppose he took 4. Let's just use English weights. That he took 4 pounds. There were 4 pounds of truma. We'll use weight for the moment. It could be possibly volume, but if he took 4 pounds of truma, right, and he consumed that by mistake, all right. So he takes one. He doesn't take 1/5 of those 4 pounds. He takes 1/4 of those 4 pounds, which would be another pound. And when you add 1 pound to the 4 pounds, you get 5 pounds. And 1 pound is 1/5 of 5 pounds. That's how this works. All right. So let's keep going. Right. So Ella, right. He doesn't use coins, but ela peirut shel chulin. But he has to use unsanctified fruit, produce. Vehenis in truma, and this unsanctified produce becomes truma, which he now presents to the priest. And that's what we learn from this verse. One of the things we learn from this verse. Going on now. Velo yechalalu, and they shall not profane et kodshei bnei Israel, the sanctified food of the children of Israel. In other words, the sanctified food that they are presenting, that the Israelites are presenting. Again, this is going to take Rashi to really explain this to us, right? So we're talking about the priests, right? Et asher yarimu Lashem, which they, and here's the truma. See, they use the verb yarim, laharim, to lift. Excuse me, I need to pop in a little T there, I think. There we go. Set aside, Lashem, for the Lord. So this gift is seen that is being given to the Kohanim, since the Kohanim represent the divine presence in a particular way. That's why it's considered as a gift to God. Let's see what Rashi says. Velo yechalalu v'gomer, right? So he says they shall not, meaning the priests, should not profane, etc. Well, exactly what do we mean here by profaning? And in this context, it means lahachilam lazarim, to provide them as food for non-Kohanim. So as much as you're a good friend of a priest, even if you're not a priest, and he invites you to dinner, he cannot serve you truma as part of the meal. This is an emphasis on this. Let's see if there's any more Rashi on this. No, that's it for that. Let's take one more verse here. Vehesiu utam avon ashma. Okay, so they shall bear for them the iniquity of guilt. We're going to need to explain all this stuff, right? The ochlam et kodshehem, when they eat their sanctified food. Who's the they here, right? It's not so clear. Ki ani Hashem mikacham, for I, the Lord, sanctify them. So we're really in need of Rashi for this. Okay. Utam, right? They shall bear upon themselves. He says the otam here, which usually is an accusative of them, it means et atzmam. They shall bear it on themselves, yitanu, they shall bear upon themselves avon, the iniquity, be'ochlam et kochehem, right? When they eat their sanctified food, and that they really referring to non-Cohen, shehu badlu l'shem truma, which they set apart, havdalah, the word havdalah, right, to set apart for the sake of truma, v'kidshu, and they sanctified it. This I believe we're talking about the Israelites here, v'ne'esru alehem, and then they were forbidden to eat it. So in other words, it's saying that a priest is considered responsible if an Israelite eats trumah. So they have to make sure that the Israelites are aware that they're not allowed to eat trumah, and in any sense that they're able to prevent that from happening, they need to do that. Rashi now gives us a little note here. The Onkelos, right, the Aramaic translator of the Torah, shetirgem b'mechal hon besu'ava, right? So he translates this as if they eat in a state of uncleanness. Shelot l'tzorech targumolchein. He translated it this way. He added these words without requiring it. There was no need for him to translate it this way. Now it could mean, that it could be that Onkelos was uncomfortable trying to translate this as referring to Israelites, that the priests were responsible for Israelites, and that he understood this as referring that it was referring to the priests eating the truma in a state of uncleanness. But he siu otam. So Rashi goes back to those opening words, and he says, "And they shall bear them." Ze echad mishlosha. He says this is one of three places atim where the word atim otam shahaya Rabbi Yishmael doresh b'Torah, which Rabbi Yishmael used to interpret in the Torah, shemidabrim ba'adam atzmo, that they're talking about the person themselves. In other words, when it says hesia otam, they shall bear, it means upon themselves, not bear them, accusative, but reflexive. But they shall bear upon themselves. That's how how Rabbi Yishmael understood this otam here. And Rashi gives us the other places where this word, this expression is used in Numbers chapter 6, Bayom Malot Yemei Yisro, on the day that he fulfills the days of his Naziriteship, Yavi Oto, he shall bring him, is the way Oto is usually understood. Hu Yavi et atzmos. But Rabbi Yishmael understands this as he shall bring himself. Right? So there's another one case. And finally, in Deuteronomy chapter 34, it says, referring to the death of Moses, Vayikbor Oto Bagai, he buried him in the valley. Hu kavar et atzmo. Rabbi Yishmael understands this as Moses burying himself. Kach nidrash b'sifrei. This is the way it's interpreted in the Sifrei, which is this early midrash, halachic midrash on Numbers and Deuteronomy. And this is where we're going to leave it today. And God willing, continue with the third Aliyah. There we are. And I'm going to stop. Does anybody want to say anything before I stop the recording? Okay.